We are back, and this time we really hope that they have started. We've been back so many times hoping that work was about to start, and it wasn't. But now my sources are telling me that the building site has been set up, and we're very excited to see if that's true or not. I hope it's true. I'm really impatient now.
And that we shall find out eventually. But first, let's roll back and see how all of this started.
So we found this ruin, we bought it, and now we have to figure out what to do with it. But first of all, we might have to answer the question, how on earth did we end up here?
Why the Amalfi Coast? That one's easy. Because it's one of the most beautiful places in one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It's been a magnet for travellers ever since the beginning of tourism, way back sometime in the 18th century, when writers and artists started including it in the Grand Tour. Back then it was probably a bit less crowded here than it is these days. But even though it's now been discovered by quite a few more people than it had even when I arrived here for the first time back in 1987, it is still possible to find calm spots and hidden pearls. You just have to know where to look. A village that is getting nearly too popular for its own good is Positano. Instagram famous, and for a good reason. Despite the crowds, it really is beautiful. Another famous village is Ravello. Perched on an edge up in the hills, known for its calm atmosphere, lush gardens and striking views. And then there's of course Amalfi itself, with its impressive cathedral steps dominating the piazza and well-preserved historical convents turned luxury hotels. But not so many tourists have discovered the other villages, like authentic Vietri, known as the Ceramics Village, the picturesque fishermen's village of Chitara, or Majori, with its admittedly more modern architecture, but also with the best beach. There is charming and unpretentious Minori, or our personal favourite, Atrani, of recent Ripley fame. The prototype image of a classic tiny Italian village on the beach, the one you believe the country's full of, but that is actually more rare than you'd think. And then you also have all the small bays or the quiet hamlets up in the hills above. The Amalfi Coast is definitely a popular destination, and you will see fellow tourists anywhere you go during season. But there are a lot of villages to choose from, many of which might bring you closer to living your Italian dream than the more famous ones can do. And yes, the summers here are buzzing, there's no doubt about that. But the Amalfi Coast's little secret is how beautiful it is out of season, when the atmosphere is calm, but the sun is still warm. Or under the rough winter storms, when giant waves crash against the cliffs, the beaches are deserted. The color of the sea varies from silver to turquoise, and the locals have their piazzas and bars more or less to themselves. So, as much as we love this coast in summer, it is the beauty of autumn, winter and spring that is the true reason why we couldn't stop dreaming about finding a house here.
So that's how we ended up here on this coast. But how come we decided it was such a brilliant idea to throw ourselves and all our energy and all our money, well, technically the bank's money, into a pile of stones on a hill?
We had already renovated 2 smaller projects here in Italy. The first one, 10 years ago, was an apartment in Rome. Our second project, a couple of years later, was the renovation of an apartment here on this coast. We truly loved it and spent all our holidays there for 6 years. But we, or possibly mostly I, had this dream all along about finding an old and run-down house and do a full restoration on it. Ideally a farmhouse, preferably with some land surrounding it, and definitely with a view over the sea. The idea might have been born from all the books and magazines I can't stop buying with stories of old restored Italian homes. Or maybe it could have been the visit a few years before to a friend's amazingly inspiring home in an old Tuscan farmhouse. Through the earlier projects, we had discovered the joy of driving around to antique markets and salvage yards for reclaimed building materials. And this just kept feeding the dream. Just imagine what we could do with a whole house. So even though we were very happy with our summer apartment, we gradually started to play with the idea of looking for something near the village that might fulfill that dream. We searched around a bit, at first mostly for fun, or that's what we told ourselves. But as we got further into the search, it became gradually more serious.
And then there was this one.
We had actually seen it quite a while ago, at the very beginning of our house hunting journey. It was at the end of a long day. We had been walking around the hillsides, climbing up and down steep steps, looking for derelict buildings we had seen on Google Earth. And we were just returning back to the village when we caught a glimpse of an old building from the footpath above. I remembered having seen it in a listing for another, more habitable house that was for sale, that had this ruin included as part of the deal. But as the price was around 5 times our budget, I had just ruled it out. But we stopped for a minute to have a look. And there was definitely something to it. The location was spectacular, of course. It had a 180 degrees view of the sea, sunrise to sunset. And the house itself had an interesting shape. But it was quite far from the road, with no apparent access unless by steps. It was easy to see that a whole lot of work and money would be involved in order to make it habitable. And the price was, of course, out of the question. In other words, not an obvious candidate. So we just snapped a photo and moved on. It wasn't until a year later, after having researched a lot of other options, that this one popped up in my mind again. After all, it had been for sale for quite some time. Buying the whole property was definitely still not on the table. But could it be worth a try to see if they would consider splitting the ruin from the rest of the property? They would not. The ruin would have no separate access, only past the main house, which then would make that tricky to sell. But by now, we had teamed up with local real estate agent Stefania. She knew the seller, and neither we nor she were inclined to accept defeat this fast. So, by giving the impression that we were now considering buying the whole thing, she finally succeeded in setting up a viewing. We got there on a cold and grey and windy February morning, had a quick look around the main house, posed a few plausible questions, and as soon as normal politeness would allow, started climbing up the hill to the ruin. And when we got up there and saw the view over the sea through a hole in the wall where the living room window used to be, I don't think we could fool anyone anymore regarding the true intent of our visit. We knew right away. This was the one. The seller, a man in his late 70s, was born in the main house. The ruin was his childhood playground. And I don't know if it was our apparent infatuation with it that won him over, or if it was Stefania's negotiation skills. It might just have been both. But in any case, as we returned back to Norway, Stefania and the seller started investigating different solutions for the access situation. And after some time, they came up with an interesting option. As it turned out, a neighbor next to this property had a piece of land to sell. And it came with a golden ticket, a diritto di passaggio, right of access, crossing the property below, the one that connected to the state road. And with that piece of the puzzle in place, achieving this wild dream actually started to seem within reach. So as spring arrived home in Oslo, we prepared for yet another trip to Italy, and this time by train. We had realized that if this project was to become our main hobby for the next 3 or 4 years, it would involve a lot of traveling. And to keep flying to a sustainable minimum, we would have to test how it would work to travel closer to the ground. Two days, quite a few railway stations and one ferry later, we arrived on the coast for another and this time more thorough viewing of the ruin we had so fallen in love with. We had made appointments to meet up with various professionals to try to get an overview of the work that was needed, the time it would take, and the cost it would involve restoring both the building and the land surrounding it. Unsurprisingly, it turned out to be quite a lot of all of the above. So, back on the train we went. The journey was still a 48-hour trip, so we had plenty of time to calculate and make wild plans. Safely back at home in Oslo, we emailed an offer, and after some predictable negotiation with both sellers, we agreed on a price. And in July 2022, 5 months after the initial viewing, we returned to the Amalfi Coast for the first major milestone, meeting up together with the sellers in the notary's office in Amalfi to sign the preliminary contract. This crazy idea of ours was now actually happening.